When my grandfather died, he left me everything. But before the will was read, my father gave my entire inheritance to his new stepson. What he never discovered was the second will, filed with a different lawyer, a document containing a single clause that would systematically destroy his own fortune if he violated my grandfather's original wishes. This is the story of a betrayal that was decades in the making, and the quiet, meticulous man who planned his revenge from beyond the grave. My name is Alara Vance, and for 24 years I believed my grandfather saw me as nothing. Then I discovered he was the only one who ever truly saw everything. To understand how a will could become a weapon, you need to know about the fortune, the family fracture, and the single weekend when my father decided his new son was worth more than his only daughter. What he didn't know was that his own father had been waiting for him to make exactly that choice. The Vance fortune wasn't built on Wall Street. It was built on 1,200 acres of Northern California timberland, a sawmill my great-grandfather opened in 1947, and a stubbornness that runs in the blood like a genetic code. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, was the stubbornest of them all, a man of few words and relentless observation. He could tell you the board-foot yield of a Douglas fir just by looking at it, and he applied that same calculating precision to people. Especially his son, my father, Robert. To understand the bomb that was about to go off in our family, you have to understand the three forces that created the pressure. Force 1, the estate. At his death, Arthur's holdings, the land, the mill, various investments were valued at just over $28 million. Not billionaire money, but legacy money. The kind that's supposed to ensure a family's future for generations. Force 2, the family fracture. My mother died when I was 8, ovarian cancer. It hollowed my father out, and he spent the next decade trying to fill that void with anything that shone brightly and didn't ask complicated questions. Enter Cynthia. She was 28 when they met. He was 45. She had a 9-year-old son, Leo. Within a year, they were married, and my father had a new project, molding Leo into the son he'd always wanted, the son I could never be. I was the quiet one, the reader, the one who preferred the company of my grandfather's old forestry manuals to the loud, performative bonding my father insisted on with Leo, football games, fishing trips where the goal was domination, not tranquility. Arthur would watch these efforts from his worn leather armchair, saying nothing, just the steady click of his pipe against his teeth, a silent metronome measuring my father's desperation. The third force was the legal mechanism Arthur understood better than any of us. The conditional inheritance clause, sometimes called an in terrorem clause, a provision in a will that states if a beneficiary challenges the terms or violates the testator's intent, they forfeit everything. It's a legal tripwire. My grandfather wasn't just planning an inheritance. He was setting a trap, and he only needed one person to spring it. Let me paint the picture of my irrelevance. Leo got a brand new truck for his 16th birthday. I got a used economics textbook from my father with a note that said, "Learn how the real world works." Leo's college tuition at a private university was paid in full, no questions asked. My acceptance to Stanford's environmental law program was met with a lecture about impractical dreams and a suggestion I attend the state school closer to home. I took out loans. He didn't. But the real signal, the one that should have been a flare gun shot into the night sky, happened the summer I turned 21. My grandfather took me to lunch, just the two of us. At a diner he'd been going to for 50 years, he slid a manila envelope across the sticky Formica table. Inside were the complete annotated property surveys for all 1,200 acres. Every plot, every easement, every soil report from the 1960s. "You're the only one who will care what's in the dirt, Alara," he said, his voice gravel. "Your father sees dollar signs. Leo sees a backdrop for his Instagram. You see the root system. Keep this. You'll need to know what you're defending." I was too naive to understand what he was really saying. I thought he was giving me a project. He was giving me the blueprint for a war he knew was coming. He was appointing me quartermaster for a battle I didn't know I'd have to fight. The final catalyst was my grandfather's health. The diagnosis was pancreatic cancer in March. He was gone by July. It was fast, and it left no time for messy goodbyes or deathbed reconciliations. What it did leave was a vacuum, and into that vacuum my father poured every ounce of his grief, his insecurity, and his burning need to prove himself as the patriarch. 2 days after the funeral, the family was summoned to the office of my grandfather's longtime lawyer, a man named Charles Whittaker. Wood-paneled walls, the smell of old paper and lemon polish. We all assumed this was the reading of the will. My father sat at the head of the conference table, Cynthia beaming beside him, Leo trying to look solemn and failing. I sat in the corner, still numb. Whittaker adjusted his glasses. What I am about to read is the last will and testament of Arthur James Vance, dated and executed in January of this year. He began to read. The language was direct. The estate was to be placed in a trust. My father, Robert, was to be the lifetime beneficiary of the income from the trust. Upon his death, the remaining trust assets, the core capital, the land, were to pass directly to me, Alara. There was a generous bequest to charity. A small fixed sum for Leo for his education. Cynthia was not mentioned. My father's face went through a series of transformations. First confusion, then dawning horror, then a rage so pure it heated the room. The will named me as the ultimate heir, it treated Leo as an afterthought, it ignored his wife entirely. In his mind, it was a public legal humiliation, a verdict from the grave that he had chosen wrong. He didn't say a word to me, he just stood up, the chair screeching against the floor, and walked out. Cynthia and Leo scrambled after him. Whitaker called after him, "Robert, there are details to discuss." The only response was the slam of the heavy oak door. I was left alone with the lawyer. "He thinks this is the end of the discussion," Whitaker said quietly, gathering the papers. "It's not. Your grandfather anticipated this reaction, every bit of it." I asked what he meant, he just shook his head. "Not today, go home, Alara." What happened next was a masterclass in betrayal disguised as paternal concern. For 3 weeks, my father didn't speak to me. Then on a Sunday evening, he called. His voice was calm, soothing even. "Alara, we need to talk about the future. The will, it's causing chaos, it's dividing the family. Leo is devastated. Cynthia feels like she's being erased. I can't have that." He proposed a family summit, a meeting to discuss a more equitable distribution. He appealed to my sense of fairness, to my love for him. He said the stress was affecting his heart. He said, and I will never forget the phrasing, "You've always been so independent, Alara. You don't need the anchor of all that land and money. But for Leo, it's a foundation. It's a start. Please, let's just talk." I was 24 years old, grieving the only person who'd ever truly seen me, and my father was asking me to surrender my future to make his new family feel secure. I said I'd think about it. That was my mistake. Giving him an inch was all he needed to take everything. The meeting was set for the following weekend at the family lake house. But before that could happen, my father went to see Charles Whitaker. Alone, and he presented him with a document, a codicil, an amendment to the will. He claimed my grandfather had been confused, influenced by medication in his final days. He claimed Arthur had verbally promised him full control to keep the family together. The codicil he presented stripped the trust provisions. It gave my father outright ownership and control of the entire $28 million estate. It reduced my inheritance to a one-time payment of $250,000, and it redirected the bulk of the legacy, the land, the mill, the investments, to be shared between my father and, upon his death, to pass to Leo. It was a total rewrite, a coup. Whitaker, bound by client confidentiality even after death, could only tell me about this meeting much later, but he did tell me what he said to my father that day. "Robert, if you file this codicil, you are setting a match to your entire inheritance. Are you absolutely sure this is what you want to do?" My father, flush with self-righteous fury, replied, "It's what my father should have wanted. I'm just correcting his mistake." Whitaker nodded slowly. "Then you should have your own lawyer file it with the probate court. I cannot be involved." My father did exactly that. He hired a new lawyer, the codicil was filed. The legal machinery began to grind, and the story presented to the world was simple. Arthur Vance, in his final, frail days, had a change of heart. He wanted his son to have control. He wanted his step-grandson to carry the Vance name forward. The original will was a relic, superseded by his final, true wishes. I was served the legal papers at my apartment. The notice of the probate filing, the copy of the codicil, the $250,000 check was attached like a tip for good service. I sat on my kitchen floor and stared at it. The amount was almost an insult, a rounding error on the estate he was giving to Leo. It wasn't about the money, it was the message. "This is what you're worth to me. This is what your mother's memory is worth. This is what your grandfather's love adds up to." I called my father. It went to voicemail. I texted. No response. The wall of silence was complete. He had gotten what he wanted, and I was now a procedural obstacle to be managed, not a daughter to be reasoned with. For 2 months, I spiraled, the grief for my grandfather mixed with a toxic, debilitating betrayal. My friends urged me to get a lawyer to contest the codicil. But how do you contest a father's word? How do you fight a narrative that paints you as the greedy child clinging to a document signed by a sick old man? I felt paralyzed. The weight of the land, the legacy my grandfather entrusted to me, felt like it was crushing me into the very dirt he loved. And then on a rainy Tuesday in October, a plain white envelope arrived. No return address, postmarked from a town 200 miles away. Inside was a key, a small silver key for a safety deposit box, and a note typed on a single sheet of paper. It said only, "Whitaker can't help you, box 714, Glenwood Trust, passcode your mother's birthday." My hands shook so badly I could barely read the words. This wasn't from my father, this wasn't from any lawyer I knew. This was a ghost reaching out from the past, a ghost with a backup plan. I drove through the rain to the Glenwood Trust Bank, a small, discreet institution in a town I'd never visited. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I presented the key, gave the passcode. The attendant led me to a private room and placed a long metal box on the table. I lifted the lid. Inside were two things: a sleek modern USB drive and a single sheet of my grandfather's personal stationery with his familiar sharp handwriting. It wasn't a long note, just 3 lines. "Alara, if you are reading this," he took the bait. "The real will is on the drive. It contains the clause. Give it to the woman whose card is paper-clipped. She's waiting, don't be afraid, this is the harvest." Paperclip to the note was a business card. It read, Eleanor Shaw, attorney at law, Shaw and Associates, litigation, probate, contested estates. I plugged the drive into my laptop. There was one PDF file. It was labeled with my grandfather's dry humor, final instructions, the real ones, dated and executed on the very same day as the will Charles Whittaker Reed, but witnessed by different people, filed with a different lawyer, Eleanor Shaw. I opened it, I scrolled past the formalities, past the bequests that mirrored the first will, and then I found it, Article 9, the conditional inheritance clause, the legal tripwire. The language was cold, precise, and devastating. It stated that if any person, specifically nomming my father Robert Vance, attempted to alter, amend, or subvert the distribution of assets as outlined in this asterisk document, the true last will, through the use of any subsequently created codicil or other instrument, then a separate punitive trust would be triggered. That trust, funded with 30% of the estate's total value up front, existed for one purpose: to legally challenge and systematically dismantle the challenger's own inheritance. It authorized the executor to use every cent in that punitive trust to fund lawsuits, forensic accountants, and legal maneuvers to tie up the violator's assets in endless litigation, effectively burning their inheritance to the ground in legal fees and court battles until nothing remained. He hadn't just left me the land, he had left me a weapon, and my father, in his arrogance, had just loaded it for me. I sat in that sterile bank room, the rain streaking the window, and I finally understood. My quiet, observant grandfather hadn't been predicting the future, he'd been engineering it. He'd given my father the first will as a test, a loyalty test with a $28 million price for failure, and my father had failed spectacularly. The note said, "Don't be afraid," but I was terrified, because this wasn't about getting what was mine anymore. This was about unleashing a legal avalanche that would bury my father and everything he had tried to build with his new family. I held the USB drive in my hand, this tiny piece of plastic that contained a nuclear option. Do I walk away with my $250,000 and the shattered pieces of my life? Or do I walk into Eleanor Shaw's office and start a war that my grandfather began from his deathbed? I picked up the business card, I looked at the phone number. This is where the story splits forever. This is the moment I became someone else. I made the call. 2 days later, I was sitting in a sun-drenched corner office on the 32nd floor, across from a woman who looked less like a lawyer and more like a hawk who just spotted movement in a field far below. Eleanor Shaw was in her late 50s with sharp gray eyes and a stillness that made the room feel quieter. She listened without interruption as I spilled it all: the first will, the codicil, the check, the safety deposit box. I slid the USB drive and my grandfather's note across her glass desk. She read the note, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Arthur Vance," she said, her voice cool and clear. "He was the most prepared client I've ever had and the most patient." She plugged in the drive, scanned the document on her screen. She didn't react to the numbers. She went straight to Article 9, the conditional clause. She read it aloud, slowly, letting each legal phrase hang in the air like a verdict. He didn't just anticipate a challenge, Alara. He engineered a proportional response. This isn't a no-contest clause. Those say if you challenge, you lose. This says, if you challenge, I will fund the army that dismantles you. It's elegant and brutal. I asked the question that had been choking me since the bank: is it legal? "In this state, absolutely," she said, turning the screen toward me. "Provided it's not encouraging illegal activity, which it isn't, and the testator was of sound mind, which he unequivocally was. I have the videos to prove it. He came to me 6 months before he died, said he needed a fallback position his usual lawyer couldn't know about. He was of perfectly sound mind. In fact, he was in a state of profound clarity. He knew your father. He predicted every single move Robert has made, including hearing that specific attorney to file the codicil. I felt the room tilt. He predicted which lawyer my father would hire. He had a list," Eleanor said simply. "Based on your father's temperament, his need for validation, and the legal circles he moved in, Arthur was right. The lawyer your father retained was option 2 on his list." Now, she leaned forward, folding her hands. "You have a decision to make. We can file this true last will with the probate court tomorrow. The moment we do, the clock starts on Article 9. Your father's codicil is the triggering event. The punitive trust, worth approximately $8.4 million, becomes active. My job, as the executor named in this document, would be to use that war chest to systematically invalidate his codicil and tie up every asset he thinks he controls. It will be a long, expensive, and publicly ugly process. It will likely destroy your relationship with him forever, or," she paused, "you can take the $250,000, you can walk away. You can let his version of history stand. What is your instruction?" I looked out the window at the city sprawling below. I thought of my father's silence. I thought of Leo's smug smile at the lake house. I thought of my grandfather, gnarled hand pushing the survey maps toward me. "You'll need to know what you're defending." "File it," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "File it all." Eleanor Shaw nodded once, then let's go to war. The legal term for what happened next is a simultaneous filing, but in reality, it was an ambush. While my father's lawyer was leisurely moving through the standard probate process for the codicil, assuming no one would contest it, Eleanor Shaw electronically filed the true last will and testament of Arthur Vance with the same court. Attached to it was a 60-page motion, a request for a temporary injunction freezing all estate assets, and a formal notice of the triggering of Article 9, the conditional inheritance clause. The effect was not subtle, it was a legal grenade rolled into a quiet chamber. My father found out via a panicked call from his lawyer at 10 a.m. on a Thursday. I know this because Eleanor's paralegal had a friend in that law firm. The story that came back was that my father screamed so loud in his office that his secretary came in, thinking he was having a heart attack. His first coherent words were, "That's not possible, Whitaker read the will, this is a forgery." But it was, and by noon the judge had granted the temporary injunction. Every account, every deed, every stockholding tied to my grandfather's estate was frozen, locked. My father couldn't touch a dime of the income. Leo's promised trust fund, frozen. The plans to renovate the lake house, frozen. It was all suddenly just data on a server trapped in legal purgatory. His response was pure, unfiltered rage. My phone blew up, first a torrent of texts. "How dare you, you vindictive little witch. You're tearing this family apart." Then the calls, I let them all go to voicemail. The third voicemail was the one I saved. His voice was low, shaking with a venom I'd never heard. "Elara, you listen to me, you withdraw this fiction immediately. You are embarrassing yourself, you are embarrassing your mother's memory. That old man was senile at the end, and you're letting some ambulance-chasing lawyer fill your head with greedy fantasies. Call it off, or so help me, you will regret it." He didn't threaten legal action, he threatened *me*. Personally, that was the moment any last shred of hope for him died. I played the voicemail for Eleanor, she didn't look up from her desk. "Good," she said. "Let him talk, it establishes character. Now we move to Phase 2. Phase 2 was disclosure. Eleanor scheduled a mandatory mediation conference, a forced sit-down between the parties overseen by a court-appointed mediator. It's meant to avoid a costly trial. My father saw it as his chance to bully me into submission. The conference room was cold. My father arrived with his lawyer, a slick man named Dorian Hess, who looked like he'd been carved from expensive tan leather. Cynthia and Leo were there too, which was a tactical mistake. It made it look like a family ambush, not a legal negotiation. I came with Eleanor, just the two of us. My father didn't look at me, he addressed the mediator, a weary-looking retired judge. "This is a farce. My daughter, manipulated by grief, and this opportunist," he gestured dismissively at Eleanor, "is attempting to probate a fraudulent document created during my father's mental decline. The true final expression of his intent is the codicil. We have the filing, we have witnesses to his state of mind." The mediator turned to us. Eleanor didn't stand, she just opened a folder. "Your Honor, we have filed the last will and testament of Arthur Vance, executed on January 15th of this year. It was prepared by my firm. It was witnessed by 2 independent parties, a notary public, and the entire execution was recorded on high-definition video to affirm the testator's capacity and intent." She slid a thumb drive across the table. "The video is 5 hours long. It includes a 2-hour question and answer session where Mr. Vance demonstrates detailed knowledge of his assets, his family relationships, and his specific reasons for the conditional clause. He is lucid, detailed, and forceful." The color drained from my father's face. "Video," he whispered. Eleanor continued, relentless. "As for the codicil your client filed, it is the triggering instrument for Article 9 of the True Will. Our first motion, to be filed after this conference should mediation fail, will be to petition the court to immediately release $8.4 million from the frozen estate into the punitive litigation trust. We will then use those funds to retain experts in forensic document analysis to examine the codicil's signature and the circumstances of its creation. We will depose your client, his wife, and his stepson about their discussions prior to Mr. Vance's death. We will subpoena the doctor who treated Mr. Vance to rebut any claim of incapacity. This will be public, it will be adversarial, and it will consume the very assets your client is trying to claim." She wasn't arguing about who was right, she was laying out the blueprint for a financial siege. Dorian Hess, my father's lawyer, shifted in his seat. He was calculating. A long, ugly, expensive fight funded by the opponent's own money is every lawyer's nightmare. My father found his voice. He pointed a finger at me, his hand trembling. "You would do this? You would use your own grandfather's money to destroy your father?" I met his gaze for the first time. "You gave my inheritance to Leo. You sent me a check for $250,000 like I was a dismissed employee. You are not being destroyed by me. You are being destroyed by the consequence you were warned about. Grandfather gave you a choice, you made it." Cynthia finally spoke, her voice a shrill plea. "Elara, please, think of Leo's future, he's just a boy." "He's 22, I said, looking at Leo, who glared back with naked hatred. "And his future was never supposed to be built on top of mine." The mediation collapsed. My father stormed out, promising to bury us in motions. Dorian Hess stayed behind for a moment, exchanging a quiet, professional nod with Eleanor. He knew what was coming. He was already thinking about his exit strategy. But here, where the story twists, the real revelation wasn't in the legal fight, it was in the video. That night in Aliner's conference room, we watched the key parts. There was my grandfather, thinner but fierce-eyed, sitting in the very chair I now occupied. The lawyer behind the camera asked him questions. "Arthur, why a second will? Why not just disinherit your son if you feared this?" My grandfather's voice, firm and clear. Disinheriting him would be a simple punishment. It would make him a victim, a martyr. This, he tapped the document. This is a lesson. He believes he's smart. He believes he can manipulate outcomes. This clause shows him the architecture of his own failure. It lets him participate in his own downfall. That's what he needs to learn. "And your granddaughter, Alara, is she meant to be the instrument of this lesson?" He smiled then, a sad, proud smile. "Alara is the beneficiary, but she is also the test. If she is strong enough to face the fire he starts, then she is strong enough to steward the land. If she isn't, the land would have eaten her alive anyway. This isn't just about inheritance, it's about fitness." I watched, my hand over my mouth. He was using me too, putting me in the crucible. The love was real, but it was a tough, unforgiving love. He wasn't saving me. He was seeing if I could save myself. Then came the bombshell, the lawyer asked, and the punitive trust, the 8.4 million. If it isn't fully exhausted in litigation, what happens to the remainder? My grandfather looked directly into the camera as if speaking to me across time. The remainder, every last cent, goes to Alara, a reward for seeing the fight through, a builder's fund, for the future she will create after the past is finally settled. I gasped. It wasn't just a war chest, it was a prize. He was incentivizing the battle, making sure I wouldn't back down from a fight that would also, win or lose, enrich me. The complexity of it was dizzying. He had thought of everything. Armed with the video, Aliner's next moves were surgical. She didn't just file motions. She released excerpts to the court that were so damaging, my father's legal position began to crumble. The narrative of a confused old man was annihilated. In its place was a portrait of a strategic genius who had anticipated his son's betrayal with chilling accuracy. Publicly, the case started to attract attention. "Million-dollar trap set by dying grandfather" was one headline. The story had everything: money, family drama, a secret will, a cunning revenge plot from the grave. My father, who valued appearances above all, was being portrayed as the arrogant, greedy son who fell for an obvious trap. It was his personal hell. His response was to escalate in the only way he had left: personal attacks. He gave an interview to a local business journal. He didn't talk about the law, he talked about me. He said I was a chronically underachieving, resentful daughter who had alienated the family long ago. He said I'd always been jealous of Leo's easy charm. He claimed my environmental law ambitions were a cover for a deep laziness, and that my grandfather, in a moment of pity, had been manipulated by my performance of caring. The article came out on a Monday. By Tuesday, it felt like the whole world had read it. Old family friends sent me awkward, pitying emails. Distant relatives called my father to offer support. I sat in my apartment, feeling the walls of the narrative my father was building close in around me. He was fighting the legal battle by destroying my character in the court of public opinion. I was ready to crawl into a hole, but Aliner Shaw had a different idea. "He's given us a gift," she said, her voice crackling with energy over the phone. "He opened the door to discovery about your asterisk life. We get to show the court who you really are, and we get to subpoena his financial records to see if he's been mismanaging estate assets in anticipation of his windfall. Turnabout is fair play." She drafted a subpoena for my father's personal and business bank records for the last 5 years. It was a fishing expedition, but a legally permissible one. The request was based on the premise that if he was accusing me of being unfit and manipulative, my fitness and his own financial behavior were now relevant to the case. The day he was served that subpoena, he showed up at my apartment building. I saw him on the security camera feed, pounding on the front lobby door. His face was a mask of fury. I didn't go down. I called the building manager, who called the police. They made him leave, but as he turned to go, he looked up directly at the camera, at me, and he mouthed 2 words: "You're dead." It wasn't a physical threat, it was a statement of finality. In his mind, I was no longer his child. I was an enemy to be erased. I should have felt fear or grief. Instead, I felt a cold, clear focus. The line was drawn, there was no going back. The legal battle was now a personal war, and my grandfather's $8.4 million war chest was just beginning to mobilize. Aliner hired a forensic accountant, a former IRS investigator named Mark, who spoke in numbers and probabilities. His job was to crawl through every transaction my father had ever made related to the estate, even peripherally. Did he use the lake house as collateral for a personal loan? Did he divert funds from the sawmill's operating account to cover his own expenses? Was he spending future inheritance money before he had the right to it? Meanwhile, my father's legal strategy shifted. Seeing the strength of the video evidence, Dorian Hess started pushing for a settlement. A private offer came. I would get the original 250,000 plus an additional $1 million. In return, I would drop the true will, renounce all claims, and sign an NDA never to speak about the case. They wanted to make me go away quietly. Elinor presented the offer to me without comment. I looked at the number, $1.25 million, more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. It was a life-changing sum, a ticket to freedom. It was also a bribe to let my father steal the other 26.75 million, to let him win, to let my grandfather's last, brilliant plan be shoved in a drawer and forgotten. I thought of the land, the 1,200 acres of fir and redwood, the sawmill that was my great-grandfather's legacy. I thought of the survey maps still in my closet, the root system I was supposed to defend. Tell them no, I said. Tell them the only settlement is the full execution of my grandfather's true will, not a dollar less, not an acre less. Elinor smiled. It was a fierce, proud smile. I'll draft the rejection. It's going to get ugly now. They'll come for you harder. Let them, I said. And they did. A week later, I was served with new papers, not from my father, from Leo. He was filing his own lawsuit against me for intentional infliction of emotional distress and tortious interference with expected inheritance. He was claiming I had maliciously destroyed his future, his mental health, and his relationship with his stepfather. He was asking for $15 million in damages. It was a frivolous suit, a nuisance action meant to drain my resources and harass me, but it was also a signal. They were throwing everything at the wall. They were desperate. When I told Elinor, she just laughed. A short, dry sound. Perfect, she said. Now we can depose him. We can ask him under oath about every conversation he ever had with your father about the money, about his expectations. This is a gift. But before we could schedule that deposition, something else happened. Something that changed the entire landscape of the war. Mark, the forensic accountant, called Elinor with an urgent finding. He'd been tracing the flows from the sawmill's business account, and he'd found a series of large, irregular transfers over the past 18 months. Payments to a shell company that traced back to a developer who had been trying to buy parcels of Vance timberland for years. My grandfather had always refused to sell. Mark's voice was tense on the speakerphone. It looks like Robert wasn't just waiting for the inheritance, he was leveraging it. I think he entered into a secret option agreement. He promised to sell off 400 acres of the core north plot to this developer the moment he gained control. He took a non-refundable deposit, $2 million. That money is sitting in an offshore account. The room went silent. My father hadn't just betrayed me, he was planning to cannibalize the legacy itself, to sell the heart of the land for quick cash. Elinor's eyes were blazing. This is fraud. This is a breach of fiduciary duty he doesn't even legally have yet. This is our knockout punch. We had him, not just on the will, on the one thing that would matter most to the court, a scheme to waste the estate assets before he even rightfully possessed them. It was the ultimate proof of his unfit character. Elinor prepared a devastating emergency motion to present to the judge. We would expose the secret land deal, demand my father be removed from any role in the estate, and ask for the immediate release of the punitive trust funds to pursue not just the will contest, but a separate fraud lawsuit against him. The hearing was set for a Friday morning. We were poised to dismantle his entire world. I should have felt triumphant, but as I walked into the courthouse that day, a strange dread settled in my stomach because I knew my father, and a cornered animal is at its most dangerous. He wouldn't go down with a whimper, he would go down trying to take me with him. I just didn't know how, not until I walked into the courtroom and saw who was sitting in the front row behind my father's table. It was Cynthia, it was Leo. It was a woman I hadn't seen in 15 years, a woman with my mother's eyes, my aunt, my mother's sister, the one person who knew all the family secrets my father had spent a lifetime trying to bury. She was here on his side, staring at me with a look of cold, grim satisfaction. And in that moment, I realized the fight for the money was over. The real war, the war for the past, for my mother's memory, for the truth of who I was just beginning. My aunt's name was Celia. She was my mother's younger sister, and she had disappeared from our lives not long after the funeral. My father had called her unstable, a drama queen. Now she was here, sitting primly behind him, a loaded weapon in a tasteful pantsuit. The hearing began, but I couldn't focus. Elinor's sharp elbow in my ribs brought me back. She was presenting the forensic accountant's findings to the judge. The secret land option, the $2 million deposit in an offshore account, she laid it out with clinical precision. Your Honor, this isn't just a dispute over testamentary intent. This is evidence of Robert Vance actively conspiring to waste estate assets before probate is even concluded. He was monetizing his expected inheritance in direct contradiction to the decedent's known wishes to keep the land intact. The judge, a severe woman with silver hair, peered over her glasses at my father's lawyer, Dorian Hess. Counselor, how do you explain this? Hess stood, looking uncharacteristically flustered. Your Honor, these are preliminary, unsubstantiated allegations. My client was exploring various business opportunities to ensure the estate's liquidity, a responsible act for a future executor. No sale was finalized, no laws were broken. He took $2 million for a promise to sell land he didn't own yet, the judge said flatly. That sounds like fraud to me. Before Hess could reply, my father stood up. He didn't ask permission, his voice boomed in the quiet room. Your Honor, if I may, this entire charade is being orchestrated by a daughter who has proven herself morally and emotionally unfit to handle any legacy. Her manipulation of a sick old man is just the latest act. We have evidence of her deeper instability, evidence that goes to the very heart of her character and her motives. The judge frowned. Mr. Vance, sit down, this is not a theater. With respect, Your Honor, it is relevant. The witness I have brought, Celia Finch, can testify to the long-standing psychological issues and the true nature of my daughter's relationship with her grandfather. It explains why he might have been susceptible to undue influence. Eleanor was on her feet instantly. Objection, character assassination is not a legal defense to fraud, Your Honor. This is a blatant attempt to smear my client. The judge held up a hand, her eyes moving from my father's furious face to Celia's calm one, then to mine. I must have looked pale because she hesitated. I'll allow a brief, limited offer of proof from Ms. Finch, outside the presence of the jury as this is a bench hearing. But Mr. Vance, if this veers into irrelevant family gossip, I will sanction you and your counsel. Do you understand? My father nodded, a triumphant gleam in his eye. He had got his foot in the door. We moved to the judge's chambers, a smaller, more oppressive room. Celia was sworn in. She didn't look at me. She told a story I had never heard. She said that in the year before my mother died, my parents' marriage was in crisis. She claimed my father had been emotionally absent, that my mother had confided in her that she felt trapped and lonely. And then she dropped the first bomb. My sister Lydia sought comfort in her friendship with Arthur, her father-in-law. It was an intense emotional connection. Some in the family wondered if it was appropriate. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's a lie, I whispered. Eleanor put a warning hand on my arm. Celia continued, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. After Lydia died, that intensity transferred to Alara. Arthur fixated on her. It wasn't healthy. He isolated her from her peers, filled her head with ideas about being the guardian of the land, the special one. It was a classic grooming dynamic. When Robert tried to intervene to give Alara a normal life, it created a rift. Arthur's final act, this so-called second will, wasn't a strategic masterstroke. It was the last act of a manipulative old man ensuring his favorite project remained under his control, even from the grave. He wasn't protecting Alara, he was owning her. The room was silent. The judge's expression was unreadable. My father looked down, the picture of pain, dignity. It was a brilliant, horrific lie. It reframed everything. My grandfather's care became predation. Our bond became pathology. My rightful inheritance became the trophy of a sick relationship. It was unprovable, unforgettable, and perfectly designed to make any judge think twice about handing a young woman $28 million. Eleanor's cross-examination was fierce but hamstrung. Ms. Finch, you admit you had no contact with the Vance family for over 15 years. On what first-hand basis do you make these claims about inappropriate intensity? My sister told me in confidence she was worried. So your evidence is the alleged, uncorroborated statements of a deceased woman who cannot confirm or deny them. I know what my sister told me, Celia said, her chin held high. And you waited until now, in the middle of a multi-million-dollar inheritance dispute, to come forward with this information, not when Arthur Vance was alive, not when Child Protective Services could have intervened. I was afraid of the family's power. I only found the courage when Robert reached out, desperate to understand why his father would do this. It was a performance, and it was working. I could see the judge's earlier certainty softening into doubt. The clean legal case was now murky, dirty, emotional. The judge ended the session, stating she would take the fraud allegations and the character evidence under advisement. She did not release the punitive trust funds. She continued the asset freeze. It was a stalemate, but one that felt like a loss. My father had poisoned the well. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. My father, with Celia on his arm, gave a solemn statement. This is a tragic family situation made worse by historical dysfunctions. We are praying for my daughter's mental health and seeking a private resolution that prioritizes healing. He was the concerned patriarch, burdened by a difficult child. I got into Eleanor's car, shaking. They're going to believe her, I said, my voice hollow. No, they're not, Eleanor said, but her usual steel was tempered with frustration. It's a smear tactic, but it's effective. It muddies the water. Judges are human. They don't like giving fortunes to people who seem messy. We need to fight narrative with narrative. How do I put my own mental health on trials? No, she said, a new idea forming in her eyes. We go deeper. Celia didn't come here out of the goodness of her heart. Your father must have promised her something. We find out what, and we find out what really happened between her and your mother. There's a reason she vanished. She assigned Mark, the forensic accountant, a new task: follow Celia's money. And she hired a private investigator, a retired police detective named Anya, to look into Celia's past. While they dug, the legal warfare entered a brutal procedural phase. Depositions, interrogatories, requests for admission. My father's lawyers dragged the process out, racking up bills, hoping to exhaust the estate's frozen funds or my will, but they were spending their own money. The punitive trust was still locked, but so was the main estate. It was a war of attrition. Leo's frivolous lawsuit was dismissed, but not before I had to sit for a deposition. His lawyer asked me invasive, ridiculous questions. Did I ever try to turn my grandfather against Leo? Did I resent Leo for being more loved? I answered with flat, one-word replies. It was demeaning. Through it all, the public story took hold. The local narrative split. Some saw me as a cunning heiress fighting a greedy father. Others, influenced by my father's and Celia's whispers, saw me as a troubled girl caught in a dead man's manipulative game. I stopped reading the comments. I stopped looking at the news. Then 3 weeks later, Anya the investigator called us to her office. She had photographs, bank records, and a timeline pinned to a corkboard. Celia Finch has been living in Arizona under a mountain of credit card debt and a failed boutique business, Anya said, pointing to statements. 6 months ago, a $50,000 deposit hit her account from a corporate entity that traces back to a shell company owned by your father's business lawyer, a consulting fee. Then last month, another 100,000. The payment memo says family reconciliation assistance. So that was her price, $150,000 to destroy my character. But that's not the interesting part, Anya continued, tapping a photo of a much younger Celia with my mother. Your mother and Celia were extremely close until I tracked down an old neighbor from their apartment building in the 90s. She said the sisters had a massive screaming fight about 2 years before your mother died. The neighbor remembered one line because she heard it through the wall. Celia yelled, "You always choose him, even when you know what he did." A cold finger traced my spine. Choose who? My father. Maybe, Anya said, but what he did could be anything. I kept digging. I found Celia's ex-husband. He was reluctant. But after some persuasion, he said Celia was obsessed with your mother's marriage. She believed your father was having an affair while your mother was sick. She claimed she had proof, but she never showed anyone. Your mother refused to believe her. That was the rupture. An affair while my mother was dying. The room seemed to tilt. I thought of my father's distant grief, his quick rebound with Cynthia. It fit a pattern, but was it true? And if it was, why would Celia, who hated my father, now be his star witness? Blackmail, Eleanor said quietly. He's not paying her for testimony, he's paying her for silence. He found out she knew about the affair and he bought her, but he's not just buying her silence, he's buying her active defamation. He turns her from a threat into a weapon. It made a sick sense, but we had no proof of the affair, just the word of a bitter ex-husband. Mark the accountant called then, his voice crackling with excitement on speakerphone. I found it, the money trail from the shell company to Celia. It's not the only one, there's another stream. Smaller, regular payments for the last 5 years to a woman named Lauren Pierce. She lives in Santa Barbara, she's a yoga instructor, and she had a child 8 years ago, a boy. The silence in the room was absolute. A boy? I finally asked. Birth certificate lists the father as unknown, but the timing is suggestive. And the payments from your father's shell company started 9 months before the birth and have continued every month since. They're labeled as wellness consulting, but they're exactly enough to cover a modest mortgage and living expenses. A secret child, a son older than Leo. The pieces exploded in my mind and then reassembled into a monstrous new picture. My father had another family, a hidden son. That was the affair Celia knew about. That was the truth he was paying her to bury. And in doing so, he had given her the power to destroy him. He must have believed he'd bought her loyalty permanently, but he'd also created the very weapon that could end him. Eleanor's eyes met mine. The calculation in them was swift and ruthless. We don't need to prove the affair in court, we just need to prove he's paying hush money. The existence of these payments to Celia and to this Lauren Pierce demonstrates a pattern of deceit and secret keeping so profound it destroys his credibility entirely. A man who hides one child and buys the silence of his dead wife's sister is not a man whose word can be trusted about his father's mental state or his daughter's character. It was the counterpunch, the knockout blow we needed, but using it meant dragging a hidden child into a public scandal. It meant weaponizing an innocent boy's existence. I don't know if I can do that, I said, my voice small. That boy, he didn't ask for any of this. Your father did this, Eleanor said, not unkindly. He created this secret, he used it to manipulate, and now it's the thread that unravels him. This is the consequence he never saw coming. But the choice is yours, Alara. We can confront him with this privately, force a settlement, or we can file it with the court and watch his entire fabricated world burn to the ground. I thought of my grandfather's words on the video. He lets him participate in his own downfall. My father had participated all right. He had built his own trap layer by secret layer. I made my choice. I told Alina to set a meeting, just my father, his lawyer, and us. No judges, no court reporters, a private reckoning. We met in a neutral conference room at a hotel. My father arrived looking smug, expecting more legal wrangling. He didn't know what was coming. Alina didn't waste time. She slid 2 folders across the table, one with the financial records tracing payments to Celia Finch, the other with the records tracing 8 years of monthly payments to Lauren Pierce in Santa Barbara. Before we proceed with tomorrow's hearing, Robert, we wanted to give you a chance to review this new evidence we will be introducing. It pertains to your credibility as a witness and your moral character as it relates to the estate. My father opened the first folder, his face tightened at Celia's payment records. This is a legitimate consulting arrangement, he sneered. I'm sure the judge will find the timing, coinciding with her sudden reappearance and devastating testimony, completely coincidental, Alina said dryly. Now open the second folder. He did. He looked at the name, Lauren Pierce. His face didn't change at first. Then he saw the dates, the amounts, the duration, 8 years. He saw the birth date of the child. A simple arithmetic he must have done 1,000 times in private. The blood left his face so completely he looked waxen. He didn't speak, he just stared. Dorian Hess, confused, leaned over to look. His eyes widened. He understood instantly. The entire dynamic of the case had just vaporized. Who is Lauren Pierce, Robert? Alina asked, her voice quiet. My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at me finally. For the first time since this began, I saw no rage, no calculation, no performative hurt. I saw raw, animal terror. The terror of a man whose deepest, most carefully guarded secret has just been laid bare on a polished table. The court will be very interested in these payments, Alina continued, and in the testimony of Ms. Pierce, and of Celia Finch, who we suspect can now be persuaded to tell a more complete story about why she really left the family and what she was truly paid for. Your entire narrative of family unity and moral concern collapses. You will not only lose the inheritance, you will be exposed as a fraud, an adulterer, and a man who abandoned a child. The scandal will follow Leo. It will follow Cynthia. It will define what's left of your life. My father found his voice a broken rasp. What do you want? Alina looked at me. This was my moment, my grandfather's final lesson. This was the harvest. I leaned forward, my hand steady on the table. You will withdraw the codicil. You will acknowledge my grandfather's true last will is valid. You will renounce all claims to the estate, including the lifetime income. You will sign a public statement admitting you were wrong about the will and about me. In return, the punitive trust is dissolved. The $8.4 million is returned to the main estate. You walk away with nothing from my grandfather. But, I said, letting the word hang. We do not file this evidence. Lauren Pierce's name is never mentioned in court. Her son's life is not appended. This remains a private family matter. It was the deal he could not refuse. Total surrender in exchange for the preservation of his last, greatest secret. He would be financially destroyed, but his fragile, curated world with Cynthia and Leo wouldn't be atomized by the revelation of an older, hidden son. He looked from the folders to me, his eyes searching for mercy, for hesitation. He found none. He saw the ghost of his father in my face. He saw the architect of his ruin. He slumped in his chair, all the fight gone out of him. He was just a tired, hollow man who had gambled everything and lost. I'll need to speak with my counsel, he whispered. Dorian Hess nodded, pale. They knew they were beaten. As we stood to leave, my father spoke again, not to Alina but to me. Did he know? Your grandfather, did he know about her? I thought of the video, of my grandfather's all-seeing eyes. I thought of the ruthless thoroughness of his plan. I think he knew everything, I said. He was just waiting to see what you'd do with the pieces. We left him there, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. The legal victory was mine, but as I walked out into the cool evening air, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the immense, quiet weight of the truth, and I knew the real work was just beginning. The war for the money was over. Now I had to figure out what to do with the piece and the poisoned ground it was built upon. The surrender was formalized 7 days later in a document so thick it thumped when it hit the judge's bench. My father, through his lawyer, submitted a formal notice to the probate court. He withdrew the contested codicil in its entirety. He acknowledged the true last will and testament of Arthur Vance as the sole governing instrument. He renounced all claims to the estate, including the lifetime income interest. In a separate, publicly filed letter, he stated that he had been mistaken about the validity of the second will and about my character. It was a legal capitulation, stripped of any grace. The judge, reviewing the mountain of evidence Alina had ready to deploy, approved the settlement and entered a final order probating my grandfather's true will. The asset freeze was lifted. The punitive trust was never activated, its $8.4 million folded back into the main estate. I was named the sole heir and executor. The war was over, I had won. But victory in court is just a piece of paper. The real aftermath is messier, quieter, and lasts much longer. My father was financially ruined. Without the income from the trust, his lifestyle, the one funded by the expectation of inheritance, imploded. He had to sell the lake house to cover his legal debts. The home in Hartford was mortgaged to the hilt. Cynthia left him 6 weeks after the settlement was final. I heard through the withering vine of family gossip that she took what liquid assets remained and moved to Florida with Leo. My father was left in a too big, empty house, surrounded by the artifacts of a life built on a lie. I never saw the secret child, my half-brother. I honored my part of the deal. His existence remains a private shadow, but I did one thing. Through a blind trust set up by Alina, I ensured the monthly payments to his mother, Lauren, would continue uninterrupted until the boy turns 18. It's not an acknowledgement, it's not love. It's a quiet debt paid so that an innocent kid isn't collateral damage in a war he never knew was fought. My grandfather's money, in a strange way, is now quietly supporting the proof of his son's greatest betrayal. The irony is not lost on me. Leo and Cynthia vanished from my life completely. There was no dramatic confrontation, no parting shot, just silence. I heard Leo used the money Cynthia took to start a small business in Tampa, a far cry from the timber empire he thought he'd inherit. Sometimes I wonder if he hates me or if he just feels relief that the performance is over. As for Celia, my aunt, the payment stopped, of course. She sent me one email after the settlement. It said, "Your mother would be ashamed of you." I didn't reply. I had Anya, the investigator, dig a little deeper on her final claim. She found old medical records from my mother's oncologist. Notes from a session where my mother expressed deep sadness about a rift with her sister Celia, but attributed it to Celia's unreliable narratives and need for drama. The doctor had noted, patient states sister has a history of confabulation when feeling slighted. My mother had chosen to believe her husband over her sister. Whether that choice was right or tragic, I'll never know, but I knew which story I believed. With the legal title clear, I faced the $28 million reality. The land, the sawmill, the investments, it was overwhelming. I moved out of my apartment and into the main house on the property, the one my grandfather had lived in. It smelled like old books, wood smoke, and him. For the first month I just walked. 1,200 acres is a vast silence. I traced the property lines from his old survey maps. I stood in the groves of old-growth redwood he'd fought to protect from loggers, including, it turned out, from his own son. I hired a manager for the sawmill, a woman named Rosario who had worked for my grandfather for 20 years and shared his ethos of sustainable forestry. We developed a plan, shift the mill's focus exclusively to salvage timber and selective eco-certified harvesting. We created a conservation easement on the most sensitive 400 acres, the same parcel my father had tried to sell, ensuring it could never be developed. The money itself felt abstract, dangerous. I established a foundation in my mother's name, funding research into early detection of ovarian cancer. I set up a scholarship for first-generation college students from our county who wanted to study environmental science. I paid off my law school loans. I lived simply. The ghost of my father's greed was a cautionary tale I carried with me every day. A year after the settlement, on a cold November afternoon, my father showed up at the property gate. He didn't call. He just stood there looking diminished in a coat that seemed too big. I saw him on the security monitor. My first instinct was to tell him to leave. My second was a hollow ache. I met him at the gate but didn't open it. We stood there, separated by wrought iron, the chill air between us. "What do you want, Dad?" He looked at the ground, then at the house behind me. "I'm selling the place in Hartford, moving to Arizona. I came to, I don't know, see it before I go." "See what?" "That I was wrong," he said, the words seeming to cost him physical pain. "Not just about the will, about you, about him." He saw the core of me and he knew I'd choose the shiny new thing over the rooted one every time. He was right. I didn't say anything, I just waited. "I loved your mother," he said, his voice cracking. "But I was weak, and when she was gone, I couldn't face the quiet she left behind or the quiet daughter who reminded me of her. Cynthia was noise, Leo was a project, it was easier. It was the closest to an apology I would ever get. It wasn't for me, not really. It was his final confession, offered to the gatekeeper of his father's world. "I'm sorry for what I did to you, Alara, I am." I nodded. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't rebuild what you broke, it just acknowledges the wreckage." He accepted that, a faint, grim nod. "Will you be okay with all this?" He gestured vaguely at the land. "I'm learning," I said. "It's not a trophy, it's a responsibility." He knew that. I'm starting to understand it. He turned to leave, then paused. "The boy in Santa Barbara, is he?" "Provided for," I said curtly, "and that's all you need to know." He flinched, then nodded again. He walked back to his car, a lonely figure getting into a sedan that would soon be repossessed. I watched him drive away, the dust settling on the gravel road. I felt no triumph, no pity, just a vast, quiet finality. The chapter was closed. The following spring, I hosted a gathering on the land, not a family event. There was no family left to host. I invited Rosario and the mill workers. I invited Alina Shaw and her team. I invited the head of the environmental charity I was funding. We had a barbecue near the creek. It was awkward at first, these people from disparate parts of my life, but the land itself seemed to ease the tension. Kids splashed in the water, the smell of grilled food mixed with pine. Alina found me leaning against a fence post, watching. He'd be proud, you know, she said, sipping a lemonade. Not just that you won, but what you're doing with it, the foundation, the easement, you're building instead of just owning. I'm trying, I said. It's the only way I know to honor him without letting his revenge define me. It doesn't define you, she said. It equipped you, there's a difference. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the trees, I felt a peace I hadn't known since before my mother died. It wasn't happiness, it was purpose, a heavy-rooted purpose. The final surprise came from Charles Whittaker, my grandfather's original lawyer. He asked to see me at a private meeting in his old wood-paneled office. He looked older, weary. I owe you an apology, Alara, he said. I was bound by client confidentiality from disclosing the existence of the second will, but I could have steered you. I could have been kinder when your father first stormed out. I was protecting my professional ethics, but I failed a friend's granddaughter. For that, I am sorry. Then he slid a small, locked metal box across the desk. Arthur left this with me. He said to give it to you 1 year after the estate was settled, provided you were the one in control of it. The instructions were very specific. I took the box. It was heavy for its size. He gave me a small key. Inside, there was no jewelry, no stock certificates. There was a simple, worn leather journal and a sealed letter. The journal was my grandfather, page after page of observations about the land, weather patterns, animal sightings, soil conditions, but interspersed were notes about the family. Robert's eyes at dinner when Cynthia talks, he's performing fatherhood, doesn't see the boy as performing back. Or Ilara asked about the watershed today, she sees the connections, her mother's mind. The letter was shorter. Ilara asterisk. If you're reading this, you held the line, you faced the fire, and you didn't let it burn the good wood. The money, the land, it's yours now, but the real inheritance isn't in the trust. It's in this journal. It's in learning to see what is, not what you wish was there. I saw your father clearly. I see you clearly too. You have your mother's heart and my stubbornness. That's a powerful combination. Don't waste it on guarding a fortress. Use it to build a sanctuary, plant new trees. They'll outlive us all. Love asterisk. Grandfather asterisk. I cried then, sitting in that familiar office. Not tears of grief or victory, but of recognition. He had seen me all along, and he had trusted me with everything, not because I was perfect, but because I was capable of learning. The story doesn't end with a neat reconciliation or a villain punished. It ends with a woman walking through a forest she now owns, a journal in her hand, understanding that the greatest legacy her grandfather left her wasn't the wealth or even the clever trap. It was the mandate to see truthfully, to act deliberately, and to build something that lasts longer than rage. My name is Alara Vance. I am 26 years old. I am the heir to a fractured legacy and the steward of 1,200 acres of tomorrow. The battle for the past is over. The work of the future has just begun. So what's the real lesson of a story like this? That money corrupts, that families break, maybe, but I think it's something more specific. It's that every family has its own currency. For some, it's love. For others, it's approval. For mine, it was legacy, a physical thing of trees and soil and a name that was supposed to mean something. My grandfather understood that currency better than anyone. He also understood that his son valued the appearance of legacy more than the substance of it, so he built a test his son was guaranteed to fail. He turned our family currency into a trap, and then he handed me the key. This isn't a story about a smart grandfather and a stupid father. It's a story about seeing. My grandfather saw the weakness, the insecurity, the need for validation that would make my father choose a shiny new son over his own rooted daughter. He saw it years in advance. And he saw in me the capacity to withstand the storm that weakness would create. He didn't give me a gift. He gave me a responsibility wrapped in a battle. And the final note in his journal proved he knew exactly what he was doing. The lingering question for me isn't about the money, it's about the cost. Was my grandfather's brilliant, punitive plan an act of love or an act of cold justice? Was protecting the land worth orchestrating a war between his son and his granddaughter? I've walked these acres for a year now and I still don't have a simple answer. I think for him, love and justice were the same thing. A tough, unforgiving love that prized truth over comfort, legacy over harmony. It's a love that leaves scars. And my father, he's living with the consequences of being seen, truly seen, by a man who refused to look away. His punishment wasn't poverty, it was clarity. The devastating, inescapable clarity of understanding exactly who he is and what he chose. Some people can live with that, I'm not sure he can. For anyone watching this who sees their own family in these fractures, the favoritism, the secrets, the quiet child overlooked for the loud one, I want you to take one thing from my story. You cannot control the legacy you're born into. You can only control what you do with the pieces after it shatters. You can spend your life trying to prove your worth to people who have already decided you have none, or you can take the shattered bits and build something new, something true on your own foundation. My foundation is 1,200 acres of silent, growing things. It's a mill that will now honor the forest instead of consuming it. It's a scholarship that might help a kid like me find their voice. It's not a happy ending because those don't exist in real life. It's a sturdy beginning. A beginning built on the hard, unromantic work of facing the truth, accepting the cost, and choosing to build anyway. If this story made you think about the lines you wouldn't cross, the secrets in your own family, or the legacy you hope to leave, let me know in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done? Would you have opened that safety deposit box? And if you want more deep dives into the true stories behind family, fortune, and the secrets that change everything, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this journey. This is Alara Vance. I'll see you next time.